Hello, everyone. You're listening to GydeBites, a podcast that delivers big L&D insights in small bites. I'm your host today. I'm Prasanna Vaidya, CEO of Guide, an AI-powered digital adoption platform. Today, we are exploring the future of learning technologies. This episode is a part of global learning and development series that we are doing with experts from all around the world, prominent experts from big organizations, professors, and all sorts of profiles from learning as a function. I'm thrilled to have two amazing guests with us today. Christina Holloway, Director of Learning and Development at Entity Data. Hi, Christina. And we also have Karl Kapp, Professor of Instructional Technology at Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania. Hi, Karl. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Welcome both of you once again. All right, so we'll straight away jump in. Christina, how will AI transform learning in coming years? So AI is all over the place, right? So why don't you go and just tell us how AI is going to transform learning?
Okay, sure. I'm happy to give my thoughts about that, Prasanna. So when we look to the future of learning and we think about the future of workforce development and organizations, I think that there has to be a paradigm shift in order, one, to accommodate current organizations and our business models and catching up to the skills that are going to be required to work with AI. And then we also want to think futuristically about those organizations that have not yet been born, but will be born in the age of AI. And so what do those business models look like? And, we're going to have a pressure and there's going to be a juxtaposition between those different types of organizations and business models, which then translates into what are those skills of the future that are going to be needed? There's a lot of fear around AI replacing jobs. And this is not unusual. When you look at the changes and the shifts from industry 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, there's always been a fear of how automation or machinery is going to replace people or jobs. It's bound to happen. But what we need to look at is how do we then in turn upskill people for the new skills that are going to be required in that era. And whether you're working for an organization that is a late adopter or a AI native organization that will be born after, this era of ChatGPT and all of these different tools coming out, we do want to think about those different skills. So what does that mean? Well, one thing we know is that the rate of skill deprecation is that quickly accelerating. So what people used to learn and would allow them to be marketable for years can now wither and die on the vine within a month. And so we want to be able to respond to that where we can help quickly upskill people and teach people not just the skill of learning those skills, but how to unlearn and relearn. So that agility of learning is going to be a critical skill moving forward. I think we also want to think about what does it mean to supplement work? And there's a lot of different things that AI is going to be able to help people do with accelerating their work. And so there's a lot of other implications for that. So for example, the question of who owns that intellectual property. What does it is there value to somebody leveraging AI to help do their job? There's going to be perceptions around that we're going to want to work on and work through in helping organizations to get with the times, to be quite blunt. Karl, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about how AI will transform learning in the coming years.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of really good ground and covered a lot of the issues that organizations are going to need to wrestle with. So I'm going to go in a slightly different direction and say that I think the future or what AI, there's a novel called The Diamond Age by a gentleman named Neil Stephenson. And he actually also wrote a book called Snow Crash, which coined the term metaverse. So he's very forward thinking. But in this book, he basically talks about the subtitle is it's a young lady's illustrated primer, and basically this is a book that basically is like AI that coaches this young woman to her journey to womanhood, and it teaches her, it gives her advice, it gives her context, it gives her recommendations on when to do things and when not to do things. And I think if we look at science facts, a lot of scientists say, well, I got the idea from Star Trek, or I got the idea from, so, and the metaverse, I think, that idea came from, Mr. Stevenson's book as well. So I think one of the things that we're going to have is we're going to truly have an educator, a mentor in our pocket. And we're going to be able to, because we already have kind of the phone and access to all the world, we're going to have this in our pocket. And so we as designers of instruction are going to have to think about not so much courses and content, but relationships and mentoring. So how do we design a mentoring framework? How do we design a mentoring conversation? What kind of information should be in it? How much does the mentor give you information, kind of give you the answer? And how much does the mentor say, wait a minute, Karl, you've got to figure this out on your own? And those kind of things, I think, are going to be an interesting future as we look to what might occur. So I'm looking forward to, I did a presentation the other day and I used AI as my co-presenter. And so I called her AI Jane, and AI Jane would answer questions and give some input and things like that. And I think things like that are just the first step toward having this companion. But back to Christina's, point, that we still have to worry about, is it going to replace a job? What kind of jobs are going to be in the future? What kind of things do we need to think about? And what are these companies and organizations of the future going to need? I was talking to one company, and they said, yeah, now that AI can do our first level customer service, we've got to train our customer service reps in more difficult conversations, more challenging discussions. So
those higher level order thinking skills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's going to be interesting as we move toward the future.
Karl, something that you said also prompted an idea that I had is those pocket coaches, right? And I believe we had a mentoring session where somebody demoed a pocket coach that they had developed, right? And it was so intriguing. But one of the huge bodies of research that cognitive psychologists and educational psychologists are focusing on is, just the idea of memory. And we talk about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve and how do we overcome that? That comes through performance support. So maybe we're leveraging things like the Google Terms Whisper courses and helping people to recall and retrain on that information moving forward. Well, in the age of AI, where everybody's carrying around a pocket coach, we're already grappling with the question, how much do people really need to be able to know versus how much can they rely on technology to be able to help them, right? If you can whip something out, it's almost like outsourcing knowledge. Then I think that there's almost that interesting implication for instructional designers when it comes down to chunking learning or space, taking a spaced approach to what needs to be trained or retrained versus what can be outsourced. What can we just say, hey, pull out your pocket AI coach?
Yeah, it's really going to be an interesting, a lot of forks in the roads that instructional designers are going to have to figure out. The old model of analysis design to, that may be out the window a little bit. And then we need to think about, okay, so what's next? How do we help people? How do we remain relevant and helpful to what we're doing? And I think one of the things that instructional designers do is they don't just give you information, they design the information. And I think us being behind some of the design of the interfaces and how frequently maybe your coach talks to you or those types of things, I think are things that, we're going to have to discover as we go along the way. But it's definitely areas where we as designers of instruction need to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean that's really wonderful, both Christina and Karl. So happy to be part of this conversation in a way. Double clicking a little bit about the pocket coaches, right? So, I mean, everybody has mobiles, everybody has these great gadgets these days. Do you really think, Carl, I'm going to throw this at you first. So, do you really think mobile learning can sort of change the skill development as we do today? How do you see that changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So two things. One is I still think there's a need for, a 3-day seminar off campus learning about leadership. I still think those kind of deep learning, like if we want to get to the point of wisdom, we can't do it all through bite-sized learning pieces, and we can't do it through a conversation with an AI coach. So we still have that need. But putting that aside, there's been some really interesting research about the power of nudging or giving reminders on mobile devices. And there was one research study actually done in India where they had two groups of men. Some were pre-diabetic, some were not. Both groups were pre-diabetic. Some got a message twice a day on their phone, and some got traditional instruction about managing the disease. And the group that got the messages, 2 behaviorally focused messages a day, talking about, take the steps instead of the elevator, don't eat while you're watching television, those kind of things. They reduced the incidences of type 2 diabetes by 36%, which is a huge behavioral change. Yeah, very fascinating stuff. So I do believe that mobile nudges, mobile information, mobile behavioral prompts can be very powerful. What we need to do though is think about, well, if I'm going to behavioral, if somebody says, oh, this is a great tool, and then everybody in the organization goes, well, compliance training, safety training, leadership training, so you get 100, nudges a day, then you're going to tune out, right? I mean, I was doing Duolingo, and Duolingo started giving me like lots of messages. I'm like, yeah, this is too much. I don't want it. And then Duolingo got snarky, like, oh, I guess you don't want to learn Portuguese. I'm like, I guess I don't. So you can get you can get overwhelmed by that. So you need to. I think that's part of our charge as designers of instruction. How can mobile learning, which we know can impact skills, but how can we do that intelligently? How can we do that and still have the business be successful? How can we do that and not have people, quietly quit or turn off their phone because it's too much? I don't know, Christine, what are you seeing in that area?
No, absolutely, Karl. I was just thinking about an app I myself use to monitor health. And one of the things they purport is that people who use this app see up to 70% improvement in achievement of their goals, right? And a lot of it is through the use of those nudges. But again, if you have that individual who has 15 apps and they're receiving 3 nudges a day, exponentially, then you're just creating a lot of noise. So how do we intelligently design for that performance support? I think that's where it comes down to understanding the motivators of that person and developing a product or a learning experience that is just, so insatiable that the value proposition inherently speaks for itself. I think it comes back to the age-old question that marketers are dealing with every day. Like, how do we cut through the noise and get your attention? And that's where there's a nice intersection between what learning and development professionals can learn from our marketing colleagues and how to help attract in order to help people learn and sustain performance at the end of the day.
You just made me think of it. It would be really interesting. I think a future business opportunity is making an app that manages your notifications.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, because we get so many, wouldn't that be interesting?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it's so sad because at the end of the day, my iPhone is like, do you want to group these notifications? Do you want these on time? Do you want this badge? And at the end of the day, I'm just like, clear,
Right. Yep.
clear.
Yep.
I don't even end up looking at them. It's whatever is demanding my attention in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, all these gadgets are in a way seeking our attention, right? I mean, the eyeballs and our voice and our interactions. That's what they are seeking. Now, double clicking on that, right? So there is yet another gadget in the market now. AR, VR, or these head glasses and so on, are they going to play any role in the learning experiences that employees or any learners at such they have today? Christina, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. We already see learning organizations who have a mature approach to adopting virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR into their learning offerings. So, for example, Verizon has been using virtual reality for quite some time to either help train their, frontline technicians to go out and learn how to work in dangerous conditions with the telephone wires, where there's high currency electricity running. And in those highly dangerous situations, a VR AR training simulation is going to be hugely helpful. Or in the medical field, where people lives are literally on the line and you want to be able to help upskill budding novice doctors on how to operate or do something. Absolutely. That's where we see a lot of use cases of VR and AR. And as the technology matures and it traverses through the product life cycle, where, there's that intersection where it doesn't necessarily become commoditized, but it to send that product to production, it costs less. And so you're able to get it to the market for less, which allows more people to afford it, and the affordability of that product increases. Then I think we're going to see VR and AR become more ubiquitous, particularly with how we're, looking at generation. I have two, a Gen Zer and a Gen Alpha in one household, these digital natives. And I think that it's just going to become part and parcel for, how they experience life. And so it behooves us as learning design professionals to think about how can we create employee learning experiences, leveraging those technologies as appropriate. We don't want to just throw VR or AR at anything, right? Because there is traditionally a long production time. I do see that's where AI is going to help us to accelerate the pace of change with how we see AI now able to produce multimedia, images, videos, those types of things. I anticipate it's only going to be a while before we can pull that into a 3D space. And so then now, what the WYSIWYG did for learning professionals, instead of having to be coders, they were able to drag and drop blocks or create something as an e-learning course. I anticipate AI is going to accelerate learning experience designers to be able to develop those VR and AR experiences. Karl, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's the future of being able to actually pull together worlds or environments very easily. I think one of the main things, so if we look at technology adoption over time, especially in L&D, it typically starts with, it has in the past maybe 10, 15 years, started with consumer adoption of things like mobile devices, right? We didn't have mobile learning until every consumer in our company had a mobile device. And then we're like, oh, well, maybe we should do something with mobile learning. So I think when it catches on from a consumer perspective, that's when we need to start paying attention to it. We didn't have AI-enabled instructional design tools before AI. ChatGPT was out there, and everybody says, hey, ChatGPT is pretty cool. We need to implement this into our tools, right? So it wasn't until commercially it caught the attention of the world, and then L&D kind of jumps onto that. And I think where we are right now with VR and AR is, if we look at what Meta's doing with the Ray-Bans, they are having augmented reality glasses that they're working on right now. It's mostly music and some simple things. But I think that is just going to accelerate. We look at, it was a while ago, but the popularity of the game Pokemon Go, I think accelerated a lot of thoughts about augmented reality. And I think those types of tools. So now one of the complaints I hear often about virtual reality is, hey, I put on these goggles and I don't know who's behind me. I don't know who's beside me. It's a little unnerving. But if I'm wearing a regular pair of glasses and the burden to entry is nothing, right? I connect my Ray-Ban glasses to my watch or my smartphone. And then I say, hey, I want to be in a virtual doctor's office to practice detailing a product to them. Boom, I'm there and I'm doing that and then I'm done. Or if I lift up my glasses, it's over or what. So I think the real breakthrough from L&D is going to come. There's already use cases like Google Glass. People are like, oh, Google Glass went away. No, it didn't. It went to very specific use cases of picking and packing in warehouses, for example. So the whole picking list is in front of me. I can go and get it, check it off. So I think that is going to accelerate the adoption of the AR and the VR.
And I also want us to think about learning, not just in a formal training sense, right? Because people learn and, skills and performance in everyday life. So let's take driving. I am going to be teaching my oldest how to drive soon. This is going to be an exciting and scary. Karl, you're laughing. I think you've been there, done that, huh?
I have been through it, yes.
Experience to have, right? But now we're seeing, and we're hearing of luxury line vehicles who are incorporating augmented reality into their vehicles. They're incorporating some of this technology into their vehicles. So what does that mean for these brand new drivers who are hitting the road, right? Instead of, I'm not going to admit to this, but in my day when I had to learn how to parallel park and it was very difficult and I might have not passed my first driver's test because of that part. Now that AR is being incorporated into these vehicles, is that going to help our new generation of drivers to learn how to become better parkers? And is it going to accelerate that learning curve for them and make them more efficient at driving, or possibly decrease accidents on the road because now we have these technologies? And even though that's not a formal training course, or a mobile course or whatnot, that is the process of learning. And so, Karl, to your point about when this technology almost becomes commoditized and it's everywhere in the consumer market, I think that's where we then see these opportunities for learning and performance to be enhanced, leveraging these technologies.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So, these kind of things basically lead to two things, right? So, one, where do we stand, or where does the privacy or the data privacy come from? And another is the challenges that we are seeing in tech adoption. Karl, do you want to go first? I know you're laughing, so I will. Maybe you'll go first.
So earlier we were talking about the tech companies have all of our data, so there's no such thing as data privacy. But but on a more practical level, I think 10, 20 years ago, a learning and development professional didn't really need to think about data privacy issues, right? That was handled by IT, or it didn't matter, or this wasn't important data, or nobody could breach us, or whatever. But there's data breaches, there's data privacy issues all over. The EU definitely has stricter data privacy concerns and needs than, let's say, the United States. And it varies all around the world. And I think it's now time for L&D professionals to be aware of cybersecurity, to be aware of privacy issues, especially if we have a course that doesn't need to be tracked, then why are we tracking it? And I think we also need to stand up and say, if the one thing I fear sometimes is that people are using, if I take a course or if I interact with AI or something, and you're tracking that and you're using that to make hiring promotion decisions or those kind of things, I fear that that's going to be an issue. So I think L&D professionals need to say, hey, look, learning needs to be some of it can, compliance and things like that. We need to track. But some of it, if an employee is interested, well, maybe I want to become a manager. I don't know. Let me take a course on see what it's like. I don't think that we should, oh, Karl, you took a course in management. Why don't you become a manager? No, I was just kind of testing it out. I'm not. So I think we need to have those kind of barriers. And I think we need to start thinking about it in our L&D departments. What are our governance policies around data privacy? And especially if you think of something like AI, which pretty much anything you put in there, they may use it for training unless it's explicitly not allowed. We need to educate ourselves in L&D about privacy and security and what it means, and just become smarter. And I think when we become smarter about it, we'll make better decisions. Christine, what do you think?
Yes, Karl, I just want to piggyback on that. Just how we were teaching people how to assess the credibility of an online resource, we need to be able to enable people to think about their privacy. And I think each person individually is going to have to become their own advocate for, in data citizenship. I don't see in the trends and where we're going in the United States, where you and I live, Karl, that there's going to be any advances with, the rights of individual citizens to be able to own their data. And there is it's a tale of two cities in that way. Because when you look at the restrictions that GDPR puts in place, and it's fantastic that it advocates on that individual level for their right to privacy, their right to be forgotten. It enables somebody to be able to be more trustful and being able to feel like, okay, I don't have this online action I took, and now it lives in the archives of foreverdom, right? In the same token, could that be stifling innovation? Could that be stifling us to be able to understand and learn new things and develop new technologies? So I feel like it's a double-edged sword in that way. But ultimately, I think it needs to come back to enabling people to understand what their rights are, and how to manage their information, what they opt into, what they don't. Again, coming back to, learning and performance just being inherent in everything that we do, and these other technologies, like I was at the Bloomberg Tech Conference in early May, and there was a competitor to Neuralink there that was demoing and discussing what it is that they want to be able to do with their product. And Neuralink, being a chip that is embedded in your brain, and it almost helps to manage your cognitive functions. On one hand, I am so excited for the guy who has Parkinson's and can now walk steadily. On the other hand, it scares the bejeebies out of me, because now I'm thinking Captain America and all the super soldiers are about to become a reality in the next 3 years, right? So, and when we're thinking of the Internet of Things, IoT, smart cities, you walking through Las Vegas and, it has an image of you, and then connecting that to your data profile, and the lack of rights you have, I think there is a very serious concern in regards to how you manage your online presence and your data, that, there's a whole onion with lots of layers we need to peel back in regards to privacy in tech and implications for learning. First step, I think it just comes down to governance at an organizational level, pulling together an internal committee of experts who can look at it from IT, HR, learning and development, legal, and say, how do we want to manage this for our people? And doing that in a way that advocates for that person, in addition to enabling them. I think that's our first best step.
Yeah. So, and Christina, does this also pose a challenge to sort of adoption as well? So, are people sort of concerned about using these tools because as Karl was mentioning, right? Yeah, someone is tracking me, if someone is making decisions based on what I do on the app and so on. So do you sort of feel that users in general are also a little scared about using all those tools?
Yeah, it's a great question, Prasanna. So I don't mean to be a fearmonger during the course of this podcast. Like, oh, everybody, like, wear a foil hat. That's not what I'm saying here. I think we do need to be thoughtful when it comes to adoption. I do think that we're going to continue seeing people who are those very early adopters. So back to that Bloomberg Tech conference I was sitting at in May, when this person was up on stage demoing their product, showing us videos of how it worked. I turned to the guy next to me and I'm like, they said, would you ever agree to having this technology implemented in your brain? And I'm thinking, no, emphatically, no. and I turned to the person next to me who happens to, oh gosh, it turns out that he himself has already signed up to be like somebody who gets it embedded because he's looking at how he can leverage it within his business.
Mm-hmm.
And so right there in 2 seats in this forum at the Pearl up in San Francisco, you have somebody who's like not even a late adopter, maybe a non-adopter, all the way to the very earliest of adopters. And I think we're going to continue having that moving forward with these different learning technologies, and people are going to be all over the spectrum. I think it comes back to learning experience designers really honing in on that target audience analysis, understanding who they're designing for, what their motivators are, and really just kind of almost doing a stakeholder analysis to understand what would it take for this person to adopt that learning solution or that experience, and then designing, because I do think there's a balance between trying to push people into the future versus meeting them where they're at. And learning experience designers have to take on the onus of designing for those different audiences. So I think we'll always have people who are at varying levels of adoption for this technology. But either way, it's going to just continue accelerating and rapidly changing. I think maybe we'll see more rapid adoption of people. I don't know. What do you think, Karl?
Well, I always think I don't know if you've ever seen that meme that says, I want AI to do my laundry and do my dishes so I can do creative things, right? Instead of AI doing creative things. So I always wonder if the technology companies are focusing on the wrong thing. So yes, it would be fantastic that it helps people with Parkinson's, but they're probably going to use it to make financial quints who can outtrade anybody on the floor, right? So I'd like to believe that because there's not as much money in, some areas as there are in others, which is unfortunate. So I often think, where is the ultimate control of this technology? So I think to go back to what you were saying, Christina, earlier about being personal advocates for technology and how the technology is being adopted and how we use those technologies. I think we need to be personal advocates and then advocates within the organization for ethical adoption, or using it correctly, and modeling ourselves how that should be done. I think is a great way to do it. I struggle, in higher education or education. To your point, they have some schools that absolutely ban any even mention of the word AI. They've taken them out of the alphabet, and so the alphabet starts with the letter B because we're not talking about AI. We have other schools that say, okay, here's how AI works. Here's red light, green light, yellow light, right? Red light, absolutely no AI for this assignment. Yellow light, you can use it a little bit. Green light, go crazy, which I think is a smart way. And if we don't teach people how to use it smartly and intelligently and ethically, then they're never going to use it that way. And so I think that some of our responsibility in learning and development is to help create that framework and help that happen. How much voice we have, it just it depends on lots of different things. But I think within our own sphere or circle of influence, I think we can manage a lot, as Christina was saying.
Karl, I think that's a fantastic point, because what we already see is that, the way our K-12 institutions teach has not changed a lot, since they adopted the whole Fordian approach, right? And just kind of this line approach to, this construction line approach to learning. And we have to shake that up in our K-12 schools, right? And once we can get that there, I think that is going to be a huge indicator of adoption. So, for example, are we no longer grading kids on the mechanics of writing, but leveraging these AI tools on how to ensure that the way they facilitate them to write is adhering to our commonly established rules of communication, right? So, for example, Grammarly, really great tool. I use it every single day. I spoke to my high schooler about it. I was like, hey, why don't you use Grammarly to help you with this assignment? Not even necessarily thinking the AI would write it for her, but just help her with ensuring that her communication comes across clearly, periods and the commas and the semicolons are where they're supposed to be. And she's like, no, my school absolutely bans it. And I think that that's where we're going to start falling and lagging behind if we're not developing those skills.
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem. I mean, I always tell a story. I was in high school and I had to take a math test, and I said, "Hey, can I use my calculator?" And the teacher's like, "No, you can't." And a kid, I'm like, "Well, why not?" And she goes, "Well, you're not going to carry a calculator around with you everywhere you go." And I literally sleep with my phone, right? I mean, practically right beside me, right? It's got the most sophisticated calculator you can imagine. It has more power than the Apollo 11 mission, right? So to say, hey, you're not going to have your calculator everywhere is at the point, did not age well. And I think the same thing with AI. Well, you're not going to have AI everywhere. You're not going to use AI to write your document, or you're not going to use AI to check your spelling or whatever. Almost every company I know has Grammarly, right? Uses AI in some way to craft emails and basic things. So the educational system very much needs to figure out a smart way to teach the people they're responsible for the smart and intelligent way to use AI. Otherwise, it'll be just sneaking around, and it's almost impossible to catch. So I did a keynote on AI. And afterwards, somebody said, "Yeah, my school where my son went, they had to ban AI because the kids were writing, fifth grade kids were writing essays with the AI." And teacher's like, "No fifth grader wrote this, so I know it's AI." And then the kids were saying, "Well, write an essay in the style of a fifth grader." And she would say, "Well, I know no fifth grader wrote this because there's no mistakes." And then they were saying, "Well, write an essay in the style of fifth grader, make 3 common fifth grade mistakes." Like, you can't, it's an escalating arms war. You can't win.
It's a slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope. So why not have them write the essay in class? Outside of class, maybe now you do other kinds of assignments, but in class is where you write, not at home anymore, right? So those kinds of thoughts and rejiggering of education, I think, are what's going to be needed, especially when you think about companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers and other places saying, hey, we're no longer hiring for a degree. If you don't have a degree, but you have the skills, we'll hire you. And so what's that doing to college, right? And in the United States, there's this big, college cliff of people who are not college age students anymore, and people are finding other ways then to get educated. And so colleges are starting to close because the demand is shrinking a little bit. So there's a lot of forces, to your point, Christina, that are going to influence education. AI, I think, being one of the big ones.
And, not even to mention those unknown unknowns, like the Black Swan event that we now know as COVID-19 pandemic, right? Yeah. Most people were caught surprised by that. But one of the silver linings that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic was the acceleration of technology adoption. So who knows if there's any other event that would come out like that to help us, propel. And some people are saying like, hey, we should expect another one of these events in the next 5 years. So, learning the lessons that we did from 2020, 2021, how can we think about preparing ourselves for something like that? That was, that was hard for us to have to scramble and figure out how to take kids to school online, right? I remember that fall, my youngest daughter was going into the first grade. The pandemic happened during her kindergarten year. That's a critical year for reading. And then the fact that we even just take for granted, when you look at your messaging app and it says send, click send. Well, if you can't read, how do you know where to click and what to press, right? So there's a lot of implications there for how do we design user interfaces, how do we leverage technology and just prepare ourselves for another event like that. I feel like I'm sounding really conspiracy theorist on this call. Super soldiers and Black Swan events.
Very sci-fi.
Very sci-fi. Yeah. I'll try not to be so dark.
I just hope whatever Black Swan event comes along, it does not confine us into the homes. I'm not a
not a
lockdown friendly person, so it was bad for me.
It was even harder in India from the news reports I saw and from my colleagues I spoke to. Well, that was tough.
Yeah,
rough.
It's rough for everyone.
All right, so I'm sort of we are reaching to the last question in a way. Karl and Christina, to both of you. So, what trends you're seeing in the medium to sort of long term for the technology and specifically learning technology? We discussed a bunch of it, but just if you want to sort of double click on a few of those.
Yeah. So when I think of trends, I like to think of convergence. So often we think of a trend as one thing, like AI is a trend or mobile learning is a trend. But I think what we really need to look is at the convergence of what's happening in terms of the technology, in terms of the needs of organizations, and in terms of the needs of the learner. So I think one of the trends that is fast approaching is the trend of a learning agent or a learning mentor. So it's a combination of AI, but of not being able to keep up with all the information or knowledge in an organization, and the need for me as a learner to learn through, the old Socratic method where I can ask questions and get information. So I think these AI agents that can, so example would be, hey, I have a meeting next week with a tech company and I need to prep for it. And so I would tell that to my agent. My agent would go out and say, well, next week you've got this meeting, you have an hour and a half free here, and you have 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here. Go out to the organization's learning management system, grab the 2-hour course and say, take this during this time, book my time on my calendar, give me that course, and then give me some maybe quizzing a little bit later on in the 10 minutes, and then give me some reinforcement. So I think these agents that can not only prepare learning for us, but look at our schedule and tell where we need to be and what we need to do, I think that's a trend that's going to pick up and take off in the very near future.
What I'd like to double click on is the learner experience there. And the trend that I'm really focused on and thinking a lot about is the external forces we're seeing where there's this epidemic of loneliness that's happening. That is kind of like this tail end, nasty residual feeling from COVID, I think. I think that that did a number on us as a society where now it's hard for people to just know how to be together, how to interact together. And we're, anthropologically social beings. That's how we define and create our culture and our shared understanding and learning. And so with this epidemic of loneliness and this increase in technology, what I'm noticing a lot within organizations is more acute focus on the employee experience and how do you bring people together, redefining culture and creating moments that matter where people can have a shared experience. So from a learning experience design perspective, I'm thinking about when I create a learning course or a learning experience, how do I enable social interaction, social sharing? Can I use a flipped classroom approach? Can I use peer-to-peer sharing? Can I include speed networking opportunities within that learning experience design so that I can help people to combat that level of isolation, this epidemic, and, learn in a shared experience together. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how technology further enables that and allows for people to have more dialogues or just-in-time meet cutes, talking over the water cooler and having those aha moments together. And so that's something that I'd like to think a little bit more of, and how can technology support that? The other technology trend that I'm also really interested in is the commoditization of skills. And how do we look at, we define skills in the future? Is there a way to leverage blockchain technology to help create talent marketplaces where people can go out and find skilled workers for these micro assignments or develop skills in order to compete in those talent marketplaces? So I think those are two interesting trends that I'm looking at, and how the convergence of that impacts learning in my organization.
That sounds perfect. So, lastly, Karl and Christina, if you could share one tip for our new aspiring L&D professionals, what would that be? Karl, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So my tip is grab an AI model, ChatGPT, Meta, Claude, whatever, and just play your heart out. Test it out, put things in, experiment, see what comes out, do all kinds of different things just to get as familiar with, generative AI as you possibly can.
My tip would be do whatever Karl does. Reach out to Karl, connect with Karl, ask Karl to be your mentor. That's my tip. For new learning experience designers. But honestly, I think one of the things that now being, and Karl actually set me on my career as an instructional designer. I met him at Bloomsburg University like 20 years ago. And it's been a while. Karl, I don't know how you're 29 and I met you 20 years ago. You're 9 years old teaching the MSIT.
Yes.
So anyway, one of the things that if I, like 2024 Christina, could go back and tell, Christina in 2000 is, like, I was so enamored with training and instructional design that I put my blinders on, and that was a lot of what I thought about. But there's a lot of other forces and things to think about in designing learning experiences. So be open to reading literature, research from other disciplines in order to incorporate those practices. And don't just be so focused on conferences or training within our own profession. Be willing to branch out, go to a marketing course, go to a product management course, go to learn more about HR and how HR impacts the organization, or marketing, supply chain. Because I think that there's a lot of tangible lessons that can be transferable in developing solid learning experiences.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Karl and Christina. It was wonderful to have you, and thank you so much for sharing the future of learning, future of how the technologies are going to play a role in that, and so on and so forth.
Thanks for having me. This has been great. Thanks, Christina. And this has been fantastic.
This is definitely the highlight of my day. Thank you, Prasanna, for the opportunity. Karl, as always, it's a pleasure to chat with you.
It's a pleasure to chat with you as well. Prasanna, it's great to meet you, and look forward to having this conversation in the future.
Thank you so
For
much.
Karl's book,
Yes.
his next book.
Sure, Karl. I'll make a point to reach out to you.
Okay.
There we go. Well, the three of us should get back together again. This was fun.
Thank you so much, Karl and Christina. Thank you to our audiences for tuning into GydeBites. And until next time, keep learning and keep innovating. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Hey, everyone.